Welcome, Siobhan, to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm so thrilled to have you as my guest today because I know that we've been talking about this for a while. We've been connected on LinkedIn, I'd say, for a number of years, but randomly bumped into each other last October at an in-person event, no less. And after chatting for a while, I think we both realised that we know each other. It was like, I think I know you from LinkedIn. I think I know you. So really, really great to be able to have this opportunity to have you on the podcast. Do you want to give people a little bit of your background, how you got into what you're doing today, and the kind of career journey that you've been on to get where you are?
I think that's probably going to take up the whole podcast. It hasn't
in
been a
in
straight
one or two
line. No,
minutes.
no, no. It won't even be that long. So yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having me on. We have spoken about it, and I remember that night at the event because we were kind of like looking at each other side eye for quite a while, going like, I know her, but I don't know where I know her from, which was great. I know for me, I've been in recruitment since 2014 and I've worked with like large agencies, boutique agencies, and then I currently am the founder of Mosaic Consultancy. So that's a recruitment agency, but it focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion, attracting like all different types of candidates. And then I'm also the host of the Glass House podcast, which is hilarious because this is the first time I've ever been a guest on a podcast and it's making my teeth itchy. I'm just like, I'm so uncomfortable with it. But how I ended up starting Mosaic was, we've spoken about this before, but it was necessity because I lost my job at the start of COVID. And I won't bore everybody with the details, but it was a shock. I was like this like really engaged employee, and then all of a sudden I was like going through this process, and it was so bad because I blurred the line of professional and personal so much that I didn't know where I started and the job started, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So when something negative was happening in the job, it was affecting me as a human,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Oh, this is all personal." So I had to go and feel like this is a confessional, but I went and got a therapist to try and help me through the process because there was a whole like disciplinary process that I had to go through. And that was really the start of a discovery of like, okay, because I remember saying to him one day, like everything's gone, everything I've worked for. I was 40, not married, no kids. So my career was everything. And he was like, yeah, okay, everything's gone, but everything's gone. So is the stress, the politics,
Hmm.
all of this. So this is like your ground zero. So I would never have left like a well-paying job to take the risk to start something. But then
Hmm.
when all of that was taken from me, it was like, well, now I can do it. Now
Yeah.
I can create something that like I buy into. So yeah, that
Now I
sounded
have
very
the
long.
opportunity.
Yeah.
And I suppose, like, listening to what you're saying, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who can relate to what you're saying, despite the kind of how things ended. But being in an environment where you feel like you're highly engaged, and then suddenly something happens and things go wrong. Because I know certainly for me in my own career history that has happened, where I've been this really highly engaged person, and then a decision is taken, for example, and anyone who's listened to the podcast for a while knows a little bit about the my own career history and kind of what happened there. Um, but I think there's a lot of people who can relate to that. It might be one kind of toxic person, or it could be one specific event that happens. But do you want to expand on kind of how you felt at that time? And also, Siobhan, I can so relate to what you're saying with your entire identity being wrapped up in your job. Because again, I think that's so relatable to people. And I'm reading so much about this type of stuff. And if I may say, for people listening, they might think that it's this idea of overwork as a way to numb feelings that are happening, feelings that are coming up. We have a tendency to do that. I know I put my hand up, I have a tendency to do that as
Me, your
well.
sister.
Yeah, exactly. So, whether it's food, whether it's alcohol or drugs or work or whatever it might be. So, there's some other things that I don't really want to mention necessarily on the work related podcast. But, these are the things that we do to make ourselves not feel. I was going to say feel better, but it's really to not feel anything at all, or to feel that we're being rewarded in some way. So if you're okay with it, would you mind kind of talking us through those feelings and how you dealt with it and how you unraveled your identity from being kind of totally wrapped up in your job, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so much there. What I will say to you is that what I learned from the whole therapy side of it is that there's no external solution, right, to anything that you're going through. An external validation isn't going to fix it. Now, what I realized was that the bitter pill to swallow was that I had a hand in what had happened because I had taught people how to treat me.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think that this, the analogy of the boiled frog, where it's like, I don't even think it's true. I'm sure the frog will jump out
I
of the
think, yeah, I think it has been busted as a myth
Yeah, but it will just give
already.
an
But
idea. Yeah, it will give
yeah,
you like an idea of it. So it's like if you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. Okay, so scientifically untrue, but if it will jump out. But if you put it into cold water and then slowly increase the temperature,
mm,
the frog boils, right?
yeah,
And I think that that's what happens with people who are in work. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, it wasn't that one thing that came to it as a shock. Like it did obviously come as a shock. It was like a punch in the throat, but
mm,
what it was that I ignored the warning signs all the way through, right? And I thought, well, if I could just be better, or if I could please more people, or if I could take on more work, maybe this situation will improve. And it wasn't going to improve because an employee can't change the culture, right? It has to come from the top. So I was like pushing a rock up a mountain, really.
mm,
And the reason that I say that I believe like some of that was my own fault or I had a hand in it was that I should have called out stuff much earlier. But what I'd done is I'd given people like almost free reign to treat me, oh, Siobhan will be grand with that, or she won't mind that, or she'll say yes to that. And that was a process that it took me a long time to, I'm like with Billy Brogan, the therapist, it took me a long time to accept that I had almost created this
mm,
reality,
yeah, yeah,
for myself. I do agree with you though in what you said, if that like, you can hide yourself in things and or these things make you numb. I hid myself in work
mm,
in the sense of like not wanting to deal with other things outside it. So it's like I'm just really busy or I'm this or I'm that.
mm,
And I'd say like I was on the phone to my mom, I tell her I'm busy every day or I'm too
yeah,
busy. And it was like
mm,
I wasn't busy, I was manic.
yeah,
And I didn't recognize that like I was on like one of the higher stages of burnout, because I would go in earlier and I would leave later
mm,
and I still wouldn't get as much stuff done. Like my productivity was lower. So I suppose what I found and for people listening is that like there's certain things that you have to look like. Now what I do is I do a career stock take
mm,
of what's working for me and what's not and what I need to cut out. And sometimes that's like people, behaviors, tasks, and that seemed to help me because I think that sometimes when you go into a job, the first 6 months you're trying to impress, right? You want to pass your probation and you want to do this and then you want something else. So you want the promotion. And if you think at all these events that we go to, the first question that people ask you is like, what do you do?
yeah, yeah,
So when I lost my job, I didn't just lose a paycheck. I lost like a sense of self, a
mm,
community, routine, value. And I had to like strip all that back to nothing. So without the job, without the money, I thought I was going to lose my apartment. I had to like get in contact with MABs. Like everything that I had, my independence was completely tied to it. So
mm,
once when all that was gone and I was like left with nothing, I realized though I still had intrinsic value
mm,
without all the trappings. And then that was better for me than building Mosaic because I could build it already being at, 100% value, a flawed human being for sure,
mm,
but still the same worth as if I was on like 100K a
yeah.
year.
Mm. I totally get that. I want to come back to this idea of being busy or being manic because I know, like, I think as a society we perceive busyness as a badge of honor, and people often say they're so busy. And just from what you're saying, it kind of got me thinking as busyness, not necessarily as a badge of honor, but busyness as a way of hiding, exactly like you're saying. You don't want to be dealing with the stuff that's going on outside of work. So you kind of bury yourself in what it is that you're doing. And I know certainly I've been guilty in the past of saying to people that I'm too busy to meet up, or I have things planned out so much in advance that if someone wants to meet up with me, it's kind of like I can't meet up with you for a month, because I have everything planned
Which is
within an inch
crazy.
of its life, which is crazy, exactly. And
Crazy.
may I say that life in Tenerife is very different. It's all quite last minute. It's all quite like I don't have plans.
Right up my
Recording
street.
this on a Friday, and I don't have plans going into the weekend. So it's actually really nice. It's much more of a laid back atmosphere. But this idea of kind of busy to manic levels of being busy, and hopefully someone who's listening today will kind of, that might resonate with them, that if you're like, why are you so busy, and are you choosing to be busy as well? And actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, it reminds me of a brilliant, I think it was a TED talk by Dory Clark, and I will put a link to that in the show notes. And if you're not into show notes, you can certainly have a look on TED or on YouTube for Dory Clark's TEDx talk about busyness and why are we so busy, because oftentimes we choose to be busy. That's why we're so busy. Absolutely. And I love what you're kind of talking about is that you ignored the warning signs, and it's a bitter pill to swallow that you have to accept responsibility of the role that you played in getting to where you are, by pleasing people, by taking on more work than you should have because you're trying to keep other people happy, essentially.
And you're operating in fear. You're not operating,
Yeah.
and you're operating out of panic, so you're not operating from a perspective of like worthiness. It's like trying to prove your worth, or like,
Yeah.
I'm so busy that I'm really important. I can take on this project. I remember I always used to think that, like, I was asked to go and collect an award on behalf of somebody, and I was really honored to go and do it. But it was like, in hindsight, I was the only person who didn't have a life outside of work who could give up their Friday evening. Whereas I was looking at it like, oh, we're a team, or we're a family, or we're this, or we're that. And it's like, no, I just didn't have a life outside of those walls. And the only person who was responsible for that was me, and I used the busyness. I mean, again, I think a lot of people do it as a badge of honor. Look how important I am.
Yeah.
Look, how integral I am to this organization.
Yeah. If I wasn't here, the whole place would fall apart.
And it won't.
Yeah. Oftentimes that shouldn't be the case anyway. We should be part of a team, and we play a vital role within that team. But we should, especially if we're a leader, we should be able to walk away from that situation and things can kind of run themselves, essentially, because otherwise we're just what I was going to say roadblock is not the right word. We're like basically the blocker, the creating a backlog, because things have to come through us in order to actually happen.
It's not like an environment of empowerment. So you're not like hiring a team who would be better than you or have different skill sets, or the kind of way. And that's also like management. That's not necessarily leader. I would say that's like more management, by making themselves important, that nobody can do my job.
Yeah.
I need to check your emails, or I need to do this. So yeah, I mean, you should 100% be able to walk away from it. And then also, what I've learned, I've said that a lot, like, over the last 3 years, but what I have learned is that, your job is something that you do. It's not who you are, and it's a business transaction. So like, if you're an employee, you have a certain skill set, like Liam Neeson, a special skill set that
I can hear that voice right now.
I know, and you sound so much better than me. But you have a special skill set, and you're selling your time and your skills to an employer who's going to give you, hopefully, like, a good salary and a psychologically safe place to work. And that's it. But you're only selling 37 and a half or 40 hours of your life. Like, the rest of it is with your family. Your real life, your real job starts when you leave, which I learned the hard way.
that kind of brings us nicely into talking about what you do now. And I'm intrigued by this idea of selling time and skills to your employer, because from what I understand about what's coming down the line in relation to the future of work, it should be time independent. So, with the movement more towards flexible working, more towards reduced working hours, that it should be more about the skills that you can bring to a role, the strengths that you have. And again, for anyone who's listened to previous episodes of the podcast, the importance of the values that you bring to the organization and how good of a fit or a match they are with the organization itself, the core values that you have as an individual and how well they mesh with the organization, but also the whether or not your needs can be satisfied at work as well. It's really, really important. So I'd love to get your take on this idea of selling your time and your skills to the employer. Do you see a shift more towards the skills and the outcomes that you can deliver?
I think it depends on the industry.
Mm.
Like, if you're in hospitality, it's going to be your time and your skills
Yeah,
because you're going to be on site, I think. But in other roles, like say, like more recently with an executive assistant. So we had met like at the EA, one of the EA networking events. A lot of those roles could be hybrid. So it could be some outcome based, that
yeah,
you're paid on the outcome.
yeah.
And then also it would be, the skills and then the hours put in, because you need to be there for whatever executive that you're supporting. But if you look at something else like, graphic design, copywriting, any of those kind of things, then that's outcome based and that's what you're selling. So you're selling on somebody gives you, you have a task to do or whatever it would be, and then you get it done in a certain amount of time,
Mm.
under a certain budget. So I do think it varies, and it depends on the area that you're in. It also depends on the type of contract that you're working.
Mm.
Like if you're on a fixed term contract, it could be project specific. So yeah,
Which would
I'm
be
gonna
more outcome based.
yeah,
Yeah.
which would be outcome based. But I do
Mm.
think though that if you look at it, like if you look at a job, say like the most standard job, right? So whether it's, I'm trying to think now, like a marketing or things like
Mm.
that, no matter what your job is, like I think what people have to do is realize that, like, not to put the employer on a pedestal. There's some great employers, like, even the companies that I worked for, like my previous recruitment consultancy, there was fabulous like leaders and everything in that business. But often I think that you need to remember that, like, they're not giving you money every month for nothing.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, like, I don't know if I can ask them this. You can,
Yeah.
you can ask anything.
Mm.
Once there's a saying, like, a closed mouth won't get fed. So it's very much like how you say it, and how you approach your employer, and whether they have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset or whatever that might be. But you're contributing something, and your contribution is valuable.
Mm.
And I think if you go into it with that, then it's less like the employer up here and then the employee,
Mm.
the lowly employee down,
Yeah.
especially in today's market. Like, they need you,
Yeah.
it's a candidate market. So
Yeah. Do you see a shift in that balance? Like, I mean, from everything I understand, when I was, I suppose, coming in my first few roles, it was very organization focused and what can you bring to the organization rather than what they can do for me. So I've seen a shift over the last 20 years or so since I started working, that it's more on equal footing. So here's what we bring to the table, and what do you bring to the table? Are you seeing more
yeah,
of
no,
that?
100%. And
Yeah.
especially, like, I know that you were saying, like, maybe over like the last 10-15 years it's changed and it's gotten a little bit more equal, but COVID has shifted
Okay. Yeah.
everything. I don't
Yeah.
even like saying that word, but yeah, it has. And it's redistributed the power. Also, the age of the workforce has changed. And I think these, like, when people were talking about quiet quitting and
Mm.
all of this, that's just doing your job.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
just doing what you were paid for. Everybody's like, oh my God, I can't believe they're quiet quitting. Like, you know,
I
just
did
doing
do
what
a
was on the
podcast
job spec.
episode, a prior podcast episode on that, and like just really questioning. There's the view that quiet quitting is essentially setting better boundaries at work, and then there's the view that that quiet quitting is something that's been happening all the time, but it's just a new name for people becoming disengaged at work. So there was loads of different things flying around. I think it initially became a trend on TikTok, and when things blow up on TikTok, then they become like really trendy. They filter through to the rest of us, exactly. But that is something that we hadn't necessarily talked about. We touched on maybe the concepts of this idea of boundaries and separating between work and life. And the impression I get from what you're saying, that what's happening out there at the moment as well, is that there needs to be this better separation, that they're not just paying you for nothing, but you should be able to ask those questions because you're being paid to do your job, and you need to be able to do your job well, and they need to create that psychologically safe environment in order for you to be able to do that. But also, equally, when you leave work, you need to be able to leave work where it is, and not be feeling like you need to be checking emails, at 9 o'clock at night and things like that.
No, I mean, the thing is, right, that the people who get upset when you set a boundary are the ones that overstep it.
Yeah.
So I was having a conversation with somebody before I came over. I was in a Zoom meeting with her earlier, and she's doing some work. And when you can tell from somebody's facial expression, she was just stressed out of her bracket.
Okay.
I think that's the driven, and it was like complete overwhelm. And I was looking at her, and I could recognize the facial expression because I had it. And when you've that much on and you've lost where you're supposed to be, the kind of, and what you're supposed to do next. I think it's like paralysis by analysis. You've gotten to a stage where there's so much.
You're completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, and you don't know where to start.
Don't know where to start. Yeah.
And I had the conversation with her, and I was like, she was saying I'm going to work late, and I was like, absolutely not. Like, get off your laptop, take your child, go for a walk. If you need to reduce your hours next week, do it, because the last thing that I would need is for her to burn out. And all your good ideas, right? Like, that's why people sing in the shower. All your good ideas and all your creativity comes when you're not actually working.
Yeah.
It's when you're taking a walk. It's when your mind is actually still. But she had said then that she's waking up in the morning and she's thinking about what she has to do. And she's going to bed and she's thinking about what she has to do. She also has a child, and a family. And it's like, this stuff that we do is important, and we get to get people jobs and, change lives that way. But you're no use to anyone, if you work yourself into an early grave, So it's like, just take a step back. And I think that I remember, in a previous company, I would get WhatsApp messages from directors at 11 p.m, and I would respond.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing. That's teaching people how to treat you, isn't it? Then that means that it's acceptable for someone to send you a text at 11 p.m. because you responded. Now, if someone sends me a message out of hours, I tend not to respond. But yeah, just an example there, yesterday, I felt like I had so much to do, but then when I looked at everything I had, it was all kind of self-inflicted stuff. It wasn't necessarily things that had a client deadline or anything like that. And I just thought, I'm feeling so overwhelmed. I'm feeling so drained. I'm feeling so getting a bit sick of whatever it was that I was doing. So it's like, I just need to step away now.
100%.
And it's such a hard decision to make, I think, because you feel compelled. When you're feeling that way, you feel like, everything I have is so important and the world is going to stop if I don't get this stuff done. But actually, when you take a break, and I did take that break, and I don't want to be making everyone jealous, but I went down to the pool for a couple of hours here in Tenerife, and it did me the absolute world of good. I had to get that bit in.
I got blown up for Afton Street, but you had to do it in the pool.
But it was so needed. I just needed to relax a bit. And then I had a call last night, but I came into work today then feeling so much more refreshed and feeling so much more happy. Like, if I'm talking about happiness at work, I need to live by those rules as well. But it's not a case of, I have everything sorted. Someone said that to me the other week. They're like, oh, but you're there standing on stage, you must have everything sorted. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm human too. I am susceptible to the fears, the range of emotions that everyone has as well. I'm not some sort of superhuman that doesn't experience.
And it's a process. I do think, don't know how many times I'm going to name drop this therapist, but one of the things that he had said to me when I first started seeing him, he was like, "So how is Siobhan Kelly?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "Well, have you asked yourself, how are you?" And I was like, "I don't think I've ever asked myself, how are you?" in like 40 years. Like, who
Yeah.
does, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he gave me this, he won't say a trick, but a tool.
Yeah.
And it's think, ink, link, right? So when you have an anxious thought or that worry, like, so this is whether, you're in work or it can be your personal life, you have one anxious thought, and I'm an overthinker anyway. And then what that does is that causes something like a physical reaction, right? And manifest in your body. So it could be for some people like a bit of a like an upset stomach. Your shoulders start to go higher, and like your jaw sets, or you clench your teeth. And then
Yeah.
because your body is physically reacting to that one anxious thought, then it sets another one. It's like, why am I feeling so tense? And then
Yeah.
it goes into this cycle, right? That
Yeah.
you end up wound up, and I nearly swore there, and I promised I wouldn't. You end up like wound up, and you don't even know the actual reason why you're
Yeah.
stressed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he said to me that think, ink, link, right? So you have the thought, follow the thought, right? So if
Yeah.
you're thinking, oh, I have so much to do and I have this and that, like write it down, get those anxious thoughts out of your head from bouncing around. And you can do it like in 5 minutes. It doesn't have to
Mm.
be a PowerPoint presentation. So that's the ink part. And then you link it. You're like, well, is this actually a worry? And it's like, no, it's not.
Mm.
I can
Yeah.
get that done here. And
Yeah.
once you have it out of your brain and on a piece of paper,
Mm.
it's actually much easier to manage. It's like, if you have a problem and you're worrying about it and over analyzing it and, going down rabbit holes of like every potential thing that could happen, and then you talk to a friend about it and they give a different perspective, and all of a sudden like you're at ease.
Yeah.
That's what this think, ink, link can do, because
Mm.
you start to become your own best friend. And then when you start to solve those problems for yourself, it builds your confidence back up, because you're
Yeah.
actually like, I can manage this.
Yeah. Yeah. You
This
feel
is
much more
normal.
empowered to be able to kind of to take control. I can totally relate to that. Like when you have a thought, and but then like this is obviously separate to your thinking link, but you're kind of like that leads into other thoughts then that are
Hmm.
connected to that first
That rabbit
thought,
hole.
and you
Yeah.
just go into this spiral or the rabbit hole, and then you're like, oh my god, my life is so terrible.
And then you
And
forget what you were worried about initially, because
yeah.
it's all so much worse. you know and sometimes the best thing, when I find helps me, is like, what's the worst that can happen? you know if we look at this situation, like if everything was to go against me, what's the worst that could happen, and how would I manage it? And the thing is, you will manage it, and you have, what's the saying, like 100% survival rate of any challenge you ever had. So whether that's the loss of a loved one, loss of a job, any of these different things, you might have battle scars. I have a few, but you get through it and take the lesson.
Yeah.
And then for me, it's like, move on.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I think you might have said that to me before. And I just love that approach. It's like you've survived 100% of everything that you've experienced
Yeah.
up to now. There's no
Yeah.
reason that you can't kind of survive, or you can't get through what it is that you're going through, whatever that might be.
It's the
Yeah.
human spirit,
Yeah.
like people that you're amazingly like strong and things like that. And like, that's the thing, like with your whole podcast, life is short.
Mm.
And if you're going to be spending like more time with your colleagues and things like that than you
Mm.
are with the people, like, who birthed you or love you or you're married to, or, you gave birth to, like, you want to make sure that it's a good place.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you're valued. You don't have to get on with everyone. Like,
Mm.
I don't believe in fairy tales, and I do think that there's like elements that are challenging and things like that, but I think they should be the exception rather than
Yeah. Yeah.
the rule.
You don't have to be best friends with everyone, but I think
Mm-mm.
if everyone is treated with a degree of respect at work, then I think that's as much as you can ask for, and you can acknowledge the differences that you have with other people. I know certainly there have been people in my work history who I didn't necessarily liked, but I still showed them respect. And then there have been other people who I haven't necessarily shown respect for, because I wasn't getting that respect back either.
Yeah. Well, to be
So
fair, it's a two-way street.
it is absolutely, yeah, very reciprocal.
Reciprocal.
Reciprocal. I nearly lost my
Well,
words
whoever's
there.
listening knows what we mean.
They know exactly what I
Reciprocated.
mean.
Yeah.
It's a reciprocal situation going on. Um, but yeah, and for me, I think that's the entire workplace culture is built around that. So if those kind of things happen, you need to call them out and say, listen, we treat each other with respect here. So, I noticed when you said XYZ that you weren't necessarily being respectful, or you were being sarcastic, or you were being passive aggressive, or whatever it might have been. But, you need to actually call those things out and acknowledge that behavior. Siobhan, any sort of key lessons that you want to share from your career history, or from that particularly bad one? Before, I'd love to kind of chat briefly about your kind of your business next.
So any kind of like lessons that I've learned so many, to be fair. I think one was like, not to, like, you can take the work seriously, but like not yourself,
Yeah.
So I also think that, like, what I've learned as well is that, when you do research, and I hope that this helps somebody, but I really bought into the leaders of like the companies that I would work for, and that would be some of the research that I would do. And like some of them like just blew me away, like, and I don't want to name names, but like, proper like CEOs, COOs, CFOs. But the reality is that it doesn't matter what it has like on the website. I'm not going to name names, but it doesn't matter what it has on a company website or whatever. The culture of your company, or the culture of the company that you're working for, is great, and the leaders are great. But the culture that you will experience on a day-to-day basis will be from your line manager. You are not, I remember my uncle saying this to me, you're not sitting beside the CEO on a day-to-day basis. That was wonderful as they may be. If you are working for a manager that is passive aggressive, that manages from fear, who wants to kind of keep you in your place, and sees these people coming up behind them, are they trying to take my job? That's why I would say, like, the lesson that I would give is, like, in the interview process, I would ask questions. I'd want to meet your direct line manager first. I'd want to know about, like, the people who have moved on from the team. Like, did they move to different departments? Was there many promotions within the department? Because I know in certain companies, like, somebody nearly has to, I don't like, pass away or something before somebody else can be promoted into a leadership role. But yeah, if you're sitting beside a line manager or a direct manager and they're toxic, it doesn't matter, that these companies are in the great place to work or whatever it might be. Your reality is going to be miserable for as long as you're working under that person. So I think that was a big lesson for me. And I think, I suppose, linked to that is that, and what we mentioned earlier, is that it's not just okay to ask questions of employers. It should be expected.
Yeah.
And it shows a level of engagement that if you're going to take that role or move to that team or do any of those things, you want to make sure that it's an environment where you can thrive, where you can contribute, where you can support people, and that you get the same in return. So yeah, that will be my advice. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and check out your direct manager.
I love that. And I love your description of the culture being experienced through your direct line manager rather than through the CEO, that you're not sitting next door to the CEO all the time experiencing this great place to work, whether they're on some list or they've won awards or not. It's through your direct line manager. I'd love to get your thoughts on how to stamp out that type of toxic culture.
Well, this is my soapbox. So the thing is, and this is still keeping it generic, let's take recruitment, for example. So recruitment, I didn't know this, but recruitment is a sales job. It's helping people. So recruitment is a sales job, and it's target driven. So that attracts a certain type of person.
That breeds that kind of mentality.
Competitiveness, my candidate, my client, all of these different things. So in that situation, some of the top billers, the top recruiters, the skill set they have doesn't match the skill set of a great leader, right? Because a great leader really works for the team that they're leading. It's like, what can I do to get you to the next level, right? And what happens a lot in sales industry or in recruitment is that the top billers are promoted because they try to keep them, and they're promoted to management, but they're not managers, right?
They're
So
not
then
good
they end up,
managers. Yeah.
no, and I mean, some of it's through no fault of their own, but they also want to bill, they also want to like make money, they want to make sales. So they micromanage, or, they're
Mm.
very direct. It's not like a coaching or a side of desk type of thing. So I think that, and that's not everyone, because like I do know some good managers, and I managed somebody and it was like a completely different relationship. But I would say 8 out of 10 times that, someone promoted to a manager in those type of industries, it's done to retain them, to give
Mm.
them a title, but it's done without the training. And I think that that's probably one of the big issues, is that like with mid management, companies really need to invest in them, and that's how you have like people leaving roles. Like they say that, yeah, that people don't leave a job, they leave bad managers.
Yeah.
And it can be really true. You could also then have like a group of employees underperforming because the manager is, passive aggressive or toxic, or
Mm.
leading from panic.
Yeah.
So
Leading
I,
from a
I
place
think,
of fear, or yeah, yeah,
yeah, or
yeah.
getting found out, like, they have imposter syndrome
Mm.
too, and they've gone from being like, amazing at the sales role or the sales side of it, and then it's like, well, one-to-one
Sink or
coaching.
swim in a leadership role because they haven't had any training in relation
Yeah.
to what to
So
do.
I think it's a lack of that, and I think as well, there should be, and I do see it with a lot of companies, like there's a more of a focus. I think Simon Sinek calls them, instead of soft skills, human skills.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah. I've
that
heard
you're
them
not,
be called critical skills as well.
yeah, well,
Mm.
look, and they get all of those things. Yeah, soft skills, I think, just doesn't describe them enough, but I think that should be part of the training and the onboarding. And it's not just, I think companies are starting to realize, some of them, and like when you're training, that the person across from you, like when you go in, all right, she or he is there to do a job, but they may have also had a sick child in the morning, and they may be a bit disheveled, or
Mm.
whatever it might be. They may have to like change their blouse because they had spit up on it, in the car, or they could have a sick parent, or whatever it might be. So like, you are going to, give your skills and your expertise, and you are getting paid for it, but you're also like a human being with
Yeah.
a life and challenges. And I think a good leader will see that,
Yeah.
and recognize it, and try and put you in an environment where, you're safe to say that you have this stuff going on, so you may not be at, 100%. And we're not at 100% the whole time anyway.
Absolutely. We can't operate on 100% the whole time. We're
I can't
not
say I've
like
seen
robots.
100% in about 14 years. I'm a strong 60.
And Siobhan, what do you think is the solution to that then? Like I hear these stories anecdotally all the time in relation to, especially in sales, where someone who's a really great salesperson gets promoted because they're such a great salesperson, and then kind of fails as a leader, and they themselves may end up moving on, or they're causing a toxic situation with their team or something like that. What do you think is the alternative?
I think probably clear career mapping, right? So
Mm.
that it's not just like, you're a great salesperson, the only place that you can go is like managing a team of people. You could go into brand management, or, you could do like, I think, I can't think of the name of them, but the test to see like where you are on like your EQ,
Yeah.
your IQ, and then working with somebody, like whether it's the HR team or whatever it might be. And if they do want to go into a leadership role, providing them with the training that they need to understand leadership,
Mm.
and what it is and how it's different from what they've been doing. Because then like everybody wins, and you're setting them up to succeed, as
Mm.
opposed to, oh look, this person is going to leave, or they're going to get like a higher paid recruitment job somewhere else. Let's stick a director badge on them
Yeah.
and hope for the best, like
Yeah.
but 100%, I think it comes down to training, and then having like clear career directions that they can go in, if they don't want to go into a management or leadership role. I also think that they need to role model these behaviors. Like, there shouldn't be, I had worked with somebody who was a manager, I didn't mean to do that big sigh, but I had done a body of work. I'll give you an example. This is another boundary I broke on myself, but I digress. I had written up a document, so it was like a salary guide, right? And it was for the roles that we were recruiting for the team, both temporary and perm. And I'd say it took me about 4 weeks, right? So this person said to me, well, why don't you just use last week's or last year's figures? I'm like, because it's the annual salary guide. So I have to highlight what's different and what the trends are and all of this. So I did it, sent it to the marketing team, and then I think they came back and said, this is going to be a short like snippet presented to camera. Who's going to do it? And the person who told me to use the previous year's figures came back straight away. I'm going to do it. And I didn't say anything. All right. That person's manager knew that I had done it and still allowed that to be done. So it's like in the same way that I gave permission to people to cross over on my boundary. So I was also wrong. I should have like clarified it. The leadership should have also said, well, actually that should, but because that person was led away with it, then that led to bigger and more infractions, you know, on the type of things they could do. And they were a manager, you know.
So it's this type of behavior and
turning a blind eye.
Bullying almost, you know, well, turning a blind eye could be seen as a form of bullying as well. But yeah, really interesting. And I love this idea of role modeling and demonstrating the behaviors and demonstrating the values that are seen as really, really important at work, especially in a particular organization.
Yeah, well, that's how I learned, well, how I started to get interested in leadership and management was because of how badly managed I was.
Yeah.
And I would have a fear of going into work, you know, every one of the agencies I worked in, like we would have like a group meeting, a team meeting every Tuesday. And every Tuesday morning I woke up thinking I want to call sick. No, I didn't. I went in, but like I was in abject fear, you know, for this meeting to be over. And I just thought, you know, I didn't have necessarily a great role model of a direct manager at the time, but I could see what they were doing and how it was making me feel. And I was like, made a promise to myself, I'm not going to do that. And that's actually how, when I was like creating Mosaic, that it was like, I'm going to take some of the good bits because there were like really good bits and really great lessons, but I'm also there will be none of this. Like as the company grows, you know, there be no like, you know, I suppose I'm trying to think of the phrase for it, but it's to do with psychological safety, but it's like, I don't want like a blame culture. I want a growth culture that you tried something, it didn't work out. Okay, let's chat about it, not to humiliate you, but so we can learn from it and and tweak it.
And talk about the systems rather than the people. Like what systems
100%.
do we need to change in order to make this process better work for us? Because it's usually not human error, it's usually a breakdown in the system or the processes that we have in place in order to get the work done.
Oh, look, and if you think about it, if you look at it from the perspective of like when somebody creates an app, you know, there's like bug fixes as it goes. So it's like, don't let perfect get in the way of good. So for me, if somebody has an idea and you want to try something and it doesn't work out, let's tweak it. Let's, you know, as much as we can. Yeah, because it should be like with anything that's going to scale or grow, it should improve. You know, because then you have like proof of the idea, because like we tried that, okay, maybe we could streamline it a little bit, but you'll never get those outcomes if you just do it theoretically. You know, you have to be able to be in a safe space to have an idea. Let's put it into practice. If it doesn't work at all, bin it. And then, you know, and then if it does work a little bit, then let's change it. But I think some cultures are like, well, you tried that and that was an abject disaster, you know, where's the return on on investment, you know,
it's all your fault and
it's all your fault, and it's like,
and you wasted so much time and money doing it. But it actually it's really great, like what can we actually learn from this? And it's great that you're able to bring those learnings in and bring the bits that you really liked and left the bits that you didn't like so much and kind of flip them on their head. Because I think oftentimes as managers or leaders, it's not even the temptation, but you role model the behaviors that you're used to. So without maybe even realizing you're behaving in the exact way that you were treated that you didn't like. And I see that happening time and time again. And it's really great that you're able to recognize that and really kind of stamp it out. The other thing I wanted to say in relation to managers is that I think we need to let people know in advance what management entails, because oftentimes it comes with a higher paycheck and a better job title, and people are enticed by that, and they're enamored by that, the whole thing
Or
associated with being a manager, and you feel more important, kind of going back
yeah,
to your earlier point, and you feel so important that you're a manager now. But actually, the day-to-day role of a manager is not all that glamorous if you're dealing with people's personal
if you're doing it
problems and
right,
doing the administration and all of that kind of stuff.
if you're doing it correctly, it's not that glamorous. It shouldn't be on a day-to-day basis. Um,
Exactly.
I know when I was asked to manage somebody, I initially said no, and there was like everyone was aghast, like what? You're
You've
doing
turned down
this
this
and you're doing this.
opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just thought, well, it's not for me, but it's a big responsibility.
Mm.
To have somebody come in who had no recruitment experience and get them set up, like it's
Yeah.
emotional, like as I said earlier, I didn't know it was sales, but your product has free will if you think of it like that. It's not
Yeah.
like you're selling a TV. So, it's an emotional job. Like, you get them all the way to interview, to get the offer, and then, it's like, well, I've decided I want to move to France and, start a vineyard or something like that. And it's like just but it's like having the emotional regulation to deal with that, and then you have to
Mm.
try and teach that to somebody
Yeah.
and get the best out of them. So that's why I had said no, because I was like, I don't know if I have the capacity to give it the commitment
That it
that
really
it
needs. Yeah.
actually requires.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially if someone has zero recruitment experience as well. So
yeah.
yeah, that's quite
No,
interesting.
I did end up managing someone, Clara, actually. She's moved to Australia just recently, so she's just gotten a new job, so she's like happy out, and she's
Yeah.
gone from like strength to strength. But I remember one day she was always afraid to be on the phones, in the rooms, and in Dominic, when you look at where she is now, the whole career trajectory is just
Yeah.
insane, because she
Yeah.
chat
Yeah.
away on the phone now,
Yeah.
like with an audience, like she's just so good at it.
Yeah.
And but I used to say, she'd be whispering on the phone, like, "Hiya, how are you?" And I'm like, Cara, like, just speak up, it's fine. And she's like, no, I can't. So I would say to her, well, go into a room and do it till you get comfortable.
Yeah.
I don't want to be listening back to your calls or anything. You do it till you get comfortable. And then when you're comfortable, and then when she came out, she was golden,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like her rate, or her engagement, her, emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
just her capacity to kind of match the right person for the right job, not just on skills, but on like who they are.
Yeah.
Like she just had like a talent for, like, she made me look good, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if it was all my management skills, but
But
yeah,
you gave her the space to develop and to grow. So I think that really helps people. I think helps them along, rather than she's sitting there and she's being quiet on the phone and you're listening to her every word and saying, oh, he said this right or he said that wrong, which has happened to me in the past, which is
so
just,
bad.
it's demoralizing and so demotivating. But you gave her that space to grow, and
Yeah.
it's great to hear about that career trajectory, going from like really quiet on the phone to now she can just speak to
Oh
anyone,
yeah, she's like, yeah,
Yeah.
she's a new woman. You wouldn't recognize her. Well, I had a manager, the same one, who had done that thing with the. Actually, the more I'm talking about this, the more I'm annoyed at myself. But when I would do my calls first, she would type notes on a Word document, like in really large font,
Yeah.
like, that's messed up, or you should have said this, or say this,
Yeah.
and it's like, how can I put that into it? Because then you're not listening to what the person on the phone is saying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're
So it's in
reading it.
real time you're seeing what she was
Yeah,
actually
and
writing.
she's slating you. So
Yeah,
you're like, it's not giving you the confidence to get whatever you needed out of the phone call.
yeah.
So I think that's like,
Another bad way to manage people.
I would have liked for somebody to do for me what I
Hmm.
could do for Clara. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so I think
And
that
do
was
you
it.
think this is my last question now, I hope, in relation to management, but do you think people recognize when they're a bad manager? Or do you think
Yeah,
that you think that they know that they're a bad manager?
I think they know. I mean, like, I think you pick up on cues.
Hmm.
I think, and I think then that makes them, well, I'm not there to be somebody's friend, you know. So I'm a big
Yeah.
believer in the story that we tell ourselves, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And what I learned from like losing my job and the whole professional grief is that you have to kind of like look inward and see what your flaws are, you know, because if you know what your flaws are, then if somebody lies about you or misrepresents you, you can say, okay, well, I know that's not true. You know, it's like it's a little bit of armor against like, you know, the challenges of today's world. But that's like just that self-awareness. But I think the story that like people will bend themselves into pretzels. Like, well, now
Mm.
this is why I'm a really directive manager,
Mm.
because like, you know, I can't blur that line. I can't be their friend.
That's just
And
who I am, or
yeah,
that's
and
just
that's
how
like
I am. That's my
that's what a
personality.
manager is.
That's
Yeah.
what a manager is. Yeah.
I say
Okay.
jump, you say
Yeah.
how high. If I
Yeah.
ask for those figures, you have them. And I think that that's what it is. It's to keep other people down. Like if you're confident in your skills and you're confident in who you are as a person or as a leader, you don't have to put people down. You don't have to
Yeah.
humiliate somebody in a meeting. You
Mm.
can sit and have, you don't have to send, one of the other things that used to happen was like, you get a message at 8:30 in the morning saying, can we have a meeting at
Makes
4?
you feel sick. Oh,
Sick.
you sick for
And
the
then
day.
you couldn't work for the day.
Yeah.
Whereas like, if you know you're good and
Mm.
you know, you need to address something, you would, hey, nothing to worry about, just wanted to have a catch up, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to have the
And
awareness to actually do that. And I, for me, everything that you're talking, and we have touched on this on the podcast in the past, is relating to trauma that we have and that we bring into work. So if you want to inflict that hurt and pain onto other people, that's your own trauma that you need to deal with and that you need to address. If
address
you
it,
feel the
yeah.
need to keep people down and to put people down and to manage by fear, whatever it might be, then think about yourself and how you're doing that. And for anyone, it kind of feels like we're just having this conversation between ourselves. I nearly forgot about listeners for a second, but for anyone who's listening today, if you know someone who's like that, or if you are that person, seek out the help. But if you know someone who's like that, maybe show them a bit of compassion, because it's just reflective of the pain that they're feeling inside.
100%. Like, and I definitely like, I'm not saying this to slate all managers, but I think sometimes like it's good for you to know, like, and I wish I'd known it, was that like it's a projection, it's not you,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know. Okay, sometimes it is you, you know, if you, but that's where the self-awareness part comes in. But
Yeah.
you know, and I was always afraid to use the term bully, you know,
Mm.
because it's like such a strong
It's
word.
just, it's extreme, isn't it? We're kind
Yeah,
of reluctant to say that, but
you are, but it
yeah.
is repeated acts. Like it
Yeah.
is like, you know, and that's what it is. It's like you don't just get bullied once. It's something that's like goes on and on and on, and it's
Yeah.
in different ways, and like it affects, you know, there's gaslighting and everything
Yeah.
involved in it. And I think that you can treat people with compassion and say, okay, well, you know, and I really did. I tried with like certain managers, but I think you also have to protect yourself.
Mm.
And it's not just about protecting your job, because you'll get another one, I can guarantee you that. Like, and it will probably end up a lot better
And
than
talk
you
to
would
Siobhan if
imagine.
you want to get a new job.
Yeah, yeah. That wasn't actually a hard sell, but yeah, I'm just saying, like, if you believe in yourself and back yourself, you will get something
Yeah.
that's better.
Sometimes it's hard if you've been bullied, because I've been in that situation. Your confidence is in the floor, and
Yeah,
yeah,
I would
it's
say
really
talk to
hard.
someone.
Mm.
When I first talked to the therapist, right? Like, so now I have a podcast. When I didn't do public speaking or anything, right? I because my voice would shake. You know, when you can feel your heart like jumping out your chest. Like I was a husk of a woman, I would say. Like I was just like everything I would say. Like we have this inner critic. I was like, am I good enough? Can I do this? Can I do that? And all of those questions that we ask ourselves, like if you have this awareness of it, is sowing doubt. So now when I hear myself saying, can I? It's like I can, and I
Yes. Okay.
switch it.
Just
You
switching it
know,
around. Love that.
yeah,
Yeah.
you know, like even before I came on, like obviously I was saying like I ask people questions, and I was thinking, what am I going to talk about? And like obviously I haven't shut up, but um, like it's being aware of it. It's like, yeah, well, I will have things to talk about. Like, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
a grown woman. Like, you know,
Well,
I have things to contribute.
what I love most about this podcast is that it can go in any direction. I don't prepare questions in advance. It's very conversational, and we just see where the conversation goes. What I'm interested in myself, but also what I feel like listeners might be interested in
Mm,
as well, you know. So that's, I think, the magic of it. That's kind of what makes
the secret
that's what
sauce.
that's what makes it what it is. And other people have said to me my listening skills and my ability then to kind of pick out some of the key points, and then I do a summary at the end so people can hear the key points, but in a kind of synopsis version. Because I got some lovely feedback the other day. Give a shout out to Dan in New Zealand. He gave me some lovely feedback because I have to dig deep sometimes to do that synopsis at the end. And he said, I absolutely love that you do that, because his head is buzzing with ideas of things he can implement, but just having that synopsis at the end helps him to be like, oh, okay, yeah, so I'll take this and I'll take this and I'll take this. But it's great to hear. And for me, it's always important to have something that you can do differently as a result. So for anyone listening, if there's anything that sparked something in you, think to yourself, what might I do differently as a result of listening to today's episode?
Well, look, I mean, hopefully people will listen to it and realize that, like, they're not alone if they are in a difficult situation in work, and that it's not a full stop if they're in a bad situation. It's like a comma or
it's not
an
the
ellipsis.
end.
No, it's not.
There's life after a terrible work
There is
situation.
100%. And the thing is that, like, and what you said, when it affects your confidence, like, my biggest fear, and I had a lot of them, like, over the last 3 years, some of them, were warranted, some of them like totally unfounded, but my biggest fear was like telling people that I'd lost my job, right? Because like there's a whole connotation, or maybe I had an association with it, and I was projecting it. And what
does it
was,
say about you? That's the perception. That
and
I
then
would
are
have that
people,
as well.
what are people going to say this? And there were so many like different things going around. And I think in the end of it, when I did tell, like, not like huge details, but when I went into and said, like, look, I lost my job and I got a therapist, and I had professional grief, and it was at the time in COVID where people were like actually losing their life, and it's like, what's happening to me isn't really that important, but it was like processing all of these different things. And once I made myself vulnerable and said, this has happened, I'm struggling, because there was a hashtag going around at the time as well. It was like hashtag business as usual. And I felt like putting my head in a blender, because I was like, it's not like people are, this was past the stage of like people making sourdough, it was like we were really getting nervous then at this stage. And I think what I would say, and what I would hope people would take away from this, is that like there's like courage and vulnerability, and you don't have to share it with the world, and or on podcasts like this, but share with somebody, and give the advice to yourself that maybe you'd give to a 15 or 14-year-old girl or boy who's getting bullied. Just talk to one person, because when you talk to one person, they can help put it in perspective for you, of like, the situation, the job, what to do. HR, can you go to HR? Because sometimes like HR obviously is for the company, so you got to be careful.
Can I jump in there and say that I'm in several HR groups and they would argue otherwise. So
really,
I think it depends on the organization. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. No, 100%. I mean, look, I know in our previous company, but I would say, look, it depends. Everything that we're saying depends on the organization.
I don't want to tar all HR with the same
No.
brush.
And I actually had somebody on from HR, I think it was from 3 Ireland, and one of the things that she has on her LinkedIn profile is it's about her team. So when people put in their bio, it's like, I am this, like I think recruiting rock star and something networking ninja or whatever it might be, right? But it's normally about the person's individual LinkedIn profile. But what was so amazing was that like she spoke about her team in it, like that she wouldn't be anywhere. And like, so those type of leaders, so I'm fully aware that they're, phenomenal people, like changing the face of HR. But then it's also, I would say, maybe the advice is read the room, look at your own individual situation, and make a call on that.
Brilliant.
Hope I didn't get you kicked out of any HR groups.
I'm here to defend them. But no, I certainly agree, because I have been in the situation myself where it felt like HR were kind of more for the company, and I've seen friends in that situation as well, where you think HR will be on your side, but actually they're there to essentially protect the interests of the organization. But I've seen so many others that it's not necessarily the case. So I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. So Siobhan, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way that they can do that?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn. they're more than welcome. So it's Siobhan Kelly Recruits. So I can send that to you. They can email me. Trying to think. Any way really. I can give you the details.
Search Siobhan Kelly on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
There might be a lot of them. I'm not so sure, but
yeah, Mosaic Consultancy is there.
You go. There you go.
You can tell that I'm really bad at this self-promotion. It's like, where can they get you? I don't know.
We'll put all of this in the show notes anyway, and of course give a shout out to your own podcast.
Yeah, so it's the Glass House, and that was, like, the reason I named it, and I have to take responsibility for it, is that like the Glass House is where things grow, and develop, and that's really what I wanted. And also, like, we didn't go into it like today because maybe it's not relevant, but I'm from like quite a working class family, and my mum was a single parent, and I lived with my extended family. And when I was growing up, like, this is like why I focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, representation matters, and if you see it, you can become it, So a lot of like my aunties and uncles didn't go to college or university, and when we would see, like, I know when I was in school and I was in transition year, I wanted to be a writer or in acting or whatever, and my career guidance counselor sent me to a hairdresser's, like. And even then I got a really bad report because he was saying I kept looking at myself in the mirror. And I was soaking everybody that I watched there, but I had no interest in it. But that's like, if I'm like, if hairdressing was your passion, like my friend is in it, and she's built a brilliant career, but it just wasn't for me. And with the Glass House, I wanted to give accessibility to people to see these leaders. Like, so say like the HR leader, and she does like business transformation in the UK and Ireland, the CEO of Siemens, Siobhan Sweeney, I think you had her on here. She was one of my first guests on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and her role, women in the workplace. And we chat about like what leadership looks like, and how people can mostly fail forward. So there's a lot of that.
It's not a clear line. It's not a clear line necessarily.
No, it actually generally never is,
This is it. This is the beauty. And it's only, like, is it Steve Jobs who said you can only connect the dots when you look backwards? You can't connect the dots looking forwards. It's only when you look back you see the pattern and the connection between everything. Yeah, it is. I just love that as a concept, because we so often try to plan in advance, and we try and look forward and say, and I'm going to do this, so that will lead me to that. But actually, if we accept opportunities that come our way, it might lead us in a different path, but it's only when we look back that we can really see the connection between everything. I just think it's so interesting, such an interesting concept. Siobhan, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast: what does being happier at work mean to you?
Being, in a sentence, like, I use like more words than most people. Being happier at work to me, I think it's feeling safe, respected, appreciated, and that you're contributing to something. You're part of something that is bigger than you, really.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
I love all of that. This idea is kind of coming more and more to light for me recently, the idea of being part of something bigger than yourself. Like, for me, the podcast is a small part of that it is, it's kind of becoming a movement. So it's great from that perspective to be part of something that's bigger than myself. But as time goes on, I'll be looking to collaborate with way more people in the future, because I've done a little bit of that recently, and it's what lights me up. I love working with other people, So love that, to be part
Even
of something bigger.
Your face, for those listening, her whole face just lit up when she was talking about that. I was blinded by this grin.
Oh, thank you. But I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to another conversation with you again in the future.
Me too, Aoife. Thank you so much. My first podcast. I appreciate you.
Thank you.